Long-time lurker on here, using a throwaway. I've recently found myself snowed in and bored, so I figured I'd finally share my own story. This really happened, and this is how it went down. No bullshit. This isn't fiction, and I'll warn you, it's long. I grew up in Ohio in the 70s, and me and my childhood friend Joe were outside all the time we could manage it. Joe lived on a farm that bordered a pretty big forest, and my parents would drop me off in the morning, and we'd stay in the woods all weekend. We'd only come out for school. We loved pretending we were frontiersmen. We'd build shelters, traps, practice making fire with sticks, the whole 9 yards. When we got to be in high school, we got this notion to pull a Stand By Me. This was based on the movie of the same name that had just come out. The idea was that we'd walk the railroad tracks out in the country, but instead of looking for a dead body, we'd find cool bridges to fish from and camp a little ways off the tracks. Of course, we knew this was dangerous and we'd likely be trespassing, but we were kids. We had a lot of fun. We did find beautiful rivers. We discovered bridges no one went to. We fished. We hid from trains. At night, we camped in woods just near the tracks and made small hidden fires. Nothing bad ever happened. It was idyllic. In fact, it was so fun we did it multiple times. Never had a problem. After high school, me and Joe went our own ways. We both left home, but always stayed in touch and always tried to coordinate visits so we'd see each other occasionally. Well, one summer in the mid-90s, it worked out that we were both in town for about a week. We'd do stuff with family in the day, and at night we'd either catch drinks at a bar or sit outside Joe's house around a fire and talk about the old days. One night, me and Joe got to talking about our Stand By Me trips. Well, nostalgia and beer are a hell of a mix. Soon we decided to take a day, walk the rails, camp one night, and walk home. The day came, we started out early morning. We had my wife drop us off in our old spot where we used to start, right outside our hometown. She thought this was absolutely crazy and made sure to mention it. When she pulled away, Joe suggested that instead of walking the usual route, we'd take the opposite direction, just to be adventurous. We knew the land well, we had a map, so I gave a what the hell, and off we set. The day went fine. It was fun, and a little sad, but in a good way. We found a bridge and sat on the edge, smoked a joint, and moved on. We had no fishing gear, but we brought some canned food and other stuff. Before night started to set in, we picked a spot to camp. It was a thick forested area, trees on every side of the train track so you felt like you were in a tunnel. We had brought small hammocks to sleep on, but before we set them up, we decided to do a little scouting of the perimeter. Now this is what we used to do in the old days too. We'd walk the area around a little bit to make sure some dude's house wasn't just over a hill, and we were actually camping in their yard. We walked maybe 100 or so feet into the woods and up a small incline. We figured if we didn't see anything from on top of this short hill, we'd be fine. But when we got to the top, we saw an old building down at the bottom, about 100 yards into the woods. It was barely visible. We pondered over what to do. We both assumed it was a sugar shack or something, because there didn't appear to be a clear road into it. From where we were, there didn't look to be anyone in it either. All was quiet. No movement could be seen. No lights. We decided to walk a little closer just to make sure. We came down the hill very slowly, and as we neared the building, we saw it wasn't a sugar shack at all. It was an old church. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. It was a squat, sagging building whose wooden planks were almost black from years of moss and rot. A cross still stood on top of the place, also weathered black. None of the windows had glass, and there were no doors, just open doorways. We got close enough to see inside. There were rows of pews and a built-up section in front for a preacher to stand. We didn't go all the way in. We didn't want to. Beyond all that, there was no sign of anyone else. No footprints, no paths, no roads. It was an abandoned church. We left immediately and went back up the hill to our spot we had picked to camp. Having a hill between us and the church made us feel better, but we were still a little uneasy. We chalked it up to the natural creepiness seeing a church in the middle of the woods would elicit. Besides, at this point it was dusk, and we just decided to rig up our hammocks and go to sleep and move on at early morning. Night set in, and as we lay in our hammocks and shot the shit, we began to hear something in the direction of the church. Our conversation about it went a little like this. "Do you hear that? What the fuck is that? It sounds like people singing." And it did sound just like singing. We both slid right out of our hammocks and hunkered down, straining to hear more. We listened for a minute or two, and the singing continued, but it wasn't getting louder. Finally, we decided to creep back up the hill and see if we could spy where the sound was coming from. We could still move very quietly in the woods from the old days. It was second nature to us. The moon was barely out, but it provided enough light so you wouldn't walk right into a tree, but it was near pitch black. We didn't use flashlights as we crept slowly up the hill, and we didn't talk. When we got to the top, we saw light in the distance. It was coming from the church, and the singing was coming from inside. Joe and I put our heads close together and had a hushed conversation that boiled down to, "Can you believe this shit?" The light looked to be candlelight from the way it flickered, and though we tried, we couldn't make out what was being sung. It sounded like church music, but in another language. We sat and watched for a while, trying to see who was in there, but we only saw occasional shadows. We had no intention of getting closer either. We had about a football field length between us, and we aimed to keep it that way. The singing continued for a bit, and then it stopped. After that, a booming male voice began to chant. I was already freaked out, but this voice thoroughly scared the shit out of me. It sounded like some Old Testament preacher you see in movies, but again, it was like he was speaking in a different language because we couldn't understand a single word. Eventually, it got to where the single male voice would say something, and then a bunch of voices would answer in song. This lasted for a while, and then they all broke into this long, sustained wail that just kept getting louder. It got so loud and so disturbing that I covered my ears. Then it stopped. At this point, I was just getting ready to say, "Let's get the fuck out of here," when Joe put a hand on my shoulder and hissed, "They're coming out." We were far enough away that we couldn't make them out really well, but what we could see was a line of figures walk out the open doorway, all holding hands in single file. We could see some of them had flashlights. They began to sing again, and the light from the flashlights began to move toward us and the hill. We booked it back down to our campsite, grabbed our shit, and ran to the tracks. Once there, we ran down the tracks in the direction we had come from. After a few minutes, we stopped and looked back. We saw lights coming down the hill. They were moving erratically, like whoever was holding them was shaking them. We continued to run in spurts and walk as fast as we could. We eventually stopped seeing the lights and came to a road. By our map, we knew a small town was about 15 minutes down it, and we walked there, got to a 24-hour gas station, and called my wife to come get us. My wife and other friends all just thought it was kids messing around, but I heard those voices, and they sure as hell didn't sound like kids to me. Not sure who those people were, but it was definitely the creepiest thing that happened to me out in the woods. Story number 1. I work in a solicitor's office as a secretary, and the receptionist was out sick this one day, and I had to cover for her for the day. The reception is at the very front of the building and kind of cut off from everything else. You have to walk through at least 2 doors and down a hallway to get to anyone else in the building. Because we were short-staffed, I was completely on my own out there. Usually not a big deal. Anyway, this bloke comes in, quite tall, 6 feet plus. He's wearing old clothes and a baggy hoodie with the hood up. He has his hands in his pocket and is acting all shift and paranoid. I go through the usual, "Hi, can I help you, blah blah." He's still acting weird, like looking around himself and not looking me directly in the eye. I really wasn't prepared for his answer, "Do you deal with armed robberies?" My heart literally stopped for a second. I didn't know what the hell to say to this guy, and there was no one close by that could help if anything happened. No one would even hear me if I shouted. This guy didn't explain himself either. He just asked me that question and let it sit there between us. After the pause, I realized he wasn't going to say anything else, so with all the bravery I could muster, I asked, "Are you the armed robber?" and gestured to his hands in his pockets. He changed in a second. He obviously realized how he was coming across and didn't want to frighten me. He took his hands out of his pockets and pulled his hood down so I could see his face and was just repeating, "No, no, love, I'm so sorry." He explained then that he was the one that was robbed and wanted to take legal action, of course. By the end of the encounter, we were laughing about it, but for a good 5 seconds I thought, shit, this is it. He's not going to be happy with the 30 pounds in petty cash and just shoot me. Story number 2. Many moons ago, I was an editor, was cutting a commercial late at night, and deadline required I stay overnight to finish. I'm on the second floor of a 30-story building. Half the floor is editing suites, and the rest is rented out to various businesses like designers, developers, mostly tech companies, except for one office, which was the largest on the floor, about 600 square feet, and belonged to a psychiatrist. It's about 3 a.m., and I'm super focused on my work. Suddenly realize I'm starving. Deli across the street from me is 24/7, so I decide to get some food. All the offices have sliding frosted glass doors. I open mine and realize the floor is completely empty and dark. Save for the emergency exit lights, it's dead and dark. I get my food and come back, close the door and watch some YouTube while I eat. Suddenly I hear the elevator bing down the hallway. I knew that the entire building except for the 19th floor was empty. 19th floor was some French company. There wasn't even anyone at the front desk. You had to swipe in with a key card at 2 doors in the lobby. I slowly slide the door quietly and stick my head out of the office. Nothing. I see the light from inside the elevator casting a light onto the floor, but I couldn't see in BC way the hallway was set up. Eventually, I lock the office door, put my giant headphones on, and get back to work. At some point, I must have fallen asleep BC around 5:30. A loud knocking on the glass wakes me up. I jump up, open the door, and see one of the building managers and a cop. I walk out into the hallway and hear a commotion and see more cops. They ask me what I'm doing here, so I explain. They ask if I saw or heard anything, and I say no, BC headphones and fell asleep, etc. Cops walks away towards the other cops. I ask the manager what's going on, and she tells me that someone broke into the building, somehow bypassing the 2 doors downstairs that required a key card, broke into the psychiatrist's office, and stole files on 3 patients according to what the doctor told her and the cops. I was there that whole time, either working or asleep, and didn't hear anything. When she told me this, I almost crapped myself. I mean, to go after 3 specific files takes some serious dedication to your mission. All I could think about was, since it wasn't some petty robbery and there are tech offices all over the floor, I kept thinking what might have happened to me had I run into them. I ended up leaving that place several months later. Story number 3. Back when I was in the Army, we ran into something pretty unexplainable during a regular navigation exercise. So navigation exercises are pretty standard throughout the world. Given a map and some coordinates, you have to find checkpoints using a compass. Of course, each squad was given a signal set to use in case of emergencies, or just to add to the weight they had to lug around. It's part of their kit anyway. There's a GPS embedded inside, but it's old school and gives coordinates only. Close to the end of the exercise, a squad had fallen hopelessly behind, but they were on their way to the last checkpoint. So I was in charge of the last checkpoint with another fellow instructor. We knew they were around us in a 1-kilometer radius, couldn't spot them due to foliage. We waited and waited for about 1 to 2 hours. You don't mess up so friggin' bad that you can't figure out a checkpoint that's 1 kilometer away. We radioed them and did not get a reply till half an hour after the initial call. They were frantic. Seems like they were walking around in circles and seeing similar landmarks. It was apparently pitch dark at where they were, and this was around 6 p.m. where the sun was only starting to set. Me and the other trainer told them not to move, and we hiked to their position using an electronic GPS. And at the coordinates given, we found no one. The forest was also eerily quiet. No insects, no birds, just dead silence. It was pretty unnerving. The radio set was silent. Not even static was coming out. We radioed them again, and they said they were at the same coordinates as us, but I saw no one. We decided to hike back to the checkpoint and wait. We gave them the coordinates to the checkpoint. About an hour later, they emerged. Took them 4 hours plus to find a checkpoint like 1 kilometer away. During final briefing, one of them told me they seemed to walk around in circles. They kept leaving marks on trees using a blade, but when they came back to what should have been the tree that they marked, the mark was gone. They also felt like they were being followed, but that should just be the forest and exhaustion playing tricks on them, right? Story number 4. So before I got a job to remodel my room, I had a bunch of furniture from deceased relatives. My bed was made in the 20s and my dresser was made in the 50s. My mother baptized this little girl and she would visit us during the weekend. She's the only kid I ever enjoyed babysitting. We got her this small toy that was like a cash register and made this stupid jingle when you pressed the scanner. When the little girl got older, she refused to play with baby toys and instead wanted to play with other stuff like laptops, smartphones, etc. You know, outgrowing toys. Anywho, the toy is eventually pushed under my bed and forgotten. Every so often when I slammed onto my bed, that stupid jingle came on. Eventually, I forget about it, and I believe the batteries die about 9 years after we bought it. Fast forward to me getting a job and cleaning out my room after I order some furniture. New bed, dresser, everything. I start throwing away everything that I don't need. I eventually get to that cash register toy and tried it out. Dead. I throw it in the trash bag. After filling the bag, I take outside and throw it away into the bin. The stupid jingle rings from within the bin. Freaks me out a bit, but maybe the button was pressed weird and the batteries gave their last charge. Whatever. Couple days before my furniture comes in and my bed is the last thing in my room. I change to pajamas and get ready for bed. I decide, one last body slam onto the bed to give it a proper farewell. I take a few spaces and go airborne, landing onto the bed with all my weight and velocity. The stupid jingle rings. I stopped jumping on any bed since. Story number 5, just now. It was about 11 p.m., and I was in my garage returning a missed call from my cousin. He didn't answer, so I just sat on the top of the stairs to the mezzanine and finished my cigarette. As I'm about to put my smoke out and go back inside the house, I hear some snuffling and crunching sounds, like something big is eating snow, from just around the corner of the open garage door. It's 8 degrees Fahrenheit, and there's around 3 of snow on the ground, and my house is in the mountains several miles out of town BTW. My first thought was, oh, Boo-Boo, my pit bull, must have gotten out somehow. I walk inside and here's old Boo-Boo snoozing on her dog bed in the laundry room. Now I'm puzzled. I casually grab my .45 ACP and a bright light, wake the dog up and bring her outside to investigate. I tell the dog, go find it, and she takes off. I walk around the garage, down the driveway, and back up to the back porch and find nothing, except my 95-pound pit bull cowering by the door. No tracks in the snow, no sign of anything, except a half-eaten deer hide on the hood of my truck in the garage. It was not there when I walked by 5 minutes prior. I'm perfectly sane and sober. What the fuck just happened? Update. So I went back out this morning and had a look around. There were very large and very faint mountain lion tracks in my driveway, on the hard-packed tire tracks in the snow that lead into the garage. The lion entered the garage through the open stall door and exited through the man door up the stairs, meaning we were very likely both in the garage at the same time. The upper-level mezzanine has a short partition wall along a walkway that leads to a storage room. I found more very fresh deer parts around the corner at the end of the walkway in front of the storage room door. The lion exited the garage onto my back deck and jumped on the roof of the house, probably when I was walking around the outside of the garage looking for tracks. He wandered off into the woods immediately behind the house. There are plenty of deer around for him to eat, so I'm not worried. Definitely going to keep a close eye on my dog, though, especially if she goes out at night. I'll go with her. Mountain lions have huge territories, so I'm sure it's moved on. Story number 6. This happened when I was at university about 10 years ago. I hadn't experienced anything like it before, and I haven't experienced anything like it since. I like to tell myself that it was an elaborate prank, given the circumstances, but I don't know who did it or why. I lived on the north side of town, and the university library was in the south. The streets are numbered north to south, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, etc. But a train track with a small woody area cuts through between 13th and 14th Street, and only a few roads actually cross it or go under it. I was studying late at the library until maybe 2 a.m. and was walking home on Friday the 13th. To get to my apartment, I have to walk north a ways, then jig down 13th to get to a road that passes under the railway. As I turn onto 13th, the streetlight above me goes out. This happens a lot, so I don't think much of it until the next streetlight goes out while I'm under it too. Then the next, then the next. As I reach about the middle of the block, all of the streetlights in front of me go out too, but the first one turns back on. Drawn by the light, I turn around and look. Standing directly under the light is a figure wearing a white hoodie and dark pants. It is looking down at the ground, so I can see no face. It is not moving. Behind me, the streetlight on the other end of the block turns on, and I turn to glance at the light. It's standing there about 500 yards from the first streetlight. White hoodie, dark pants, looking down. I double take back to the first light. Nobody is there. Now I'm pretty freaked out. The figure in front of me slowly looks up. The hood looks empty. I try to sound manly and say, "Hello," but I'm a little squeaky. The figure turns and walks across the street into the woody area by the tracks. I can see the white of the hoodie for a little while, then it's gone. All of the street lights on the block, about 10, turn back on all at once. I ran home. Story number 7. I don't know if I would say the only possibility is paranormal, but it was damn weird. I have had several dreams similar to what I am posting. I've been a caver in Florida for about 13 years, since I was about 6, and have been to a lot of caves. Never been afraid before this to go in one. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I started having this reoccurring dream. I would have it at least twice a year, always the same, even though I would realize I was dreaming after the first few iterations. I would fall asleep and dream of being in a cave and going into this little hole in the bottom. Inside, I would see a 10 to 15 foot long corridor, about 2 to 4 feet high. At the end, it would always turn left, and I always saw a bent red stop sign at the end, like someone ripped off the top 2 feet and tossed it in. But I would always follow the corridor. I would turn and walk past the sign despite being scared, despite many times knowing what was there, and the corridor would start descending, quickly opening up into a large vertical chamber with the path leading down in a corkscrew. Everything became blurry at this point, but it was always the same. I saw trash scattered on the walls. I saw the pit leading down to a curved floor. I saw things, undefined, animals or people or something else at the bottom. And I saw my family, each with one of the things, being tortured and killed, every time. And I could never do anything. After I saw that, I would be stuck for a few seconds, until I felt more than saw everything turn and look at me. And I would wake up. Not like a normal dream where you just drift to consciousness or a nightmare where you bolt up in fear, but like something pushed me out, like I wasn't supposed to be there. So I have this dream multiple times a year until I turned 15. My father decided to take us to some caves we never had been before, one of which was Dog Drop. It was likely named so because someone either threw their pet in there or a coyote fell in, and the body was later discovered. Dog Drop had a roughly 30-foot rappel straight down to enter. I went down with my brother while my father waited up at the top. There was a hole in the ground. I started to feel uneasy, though I didn't know why, so I followed my brother into the hole. I felt worse as I moved down, and when I looked up, I saw the same corridor, the same turn, the same wall, the same bottles at the corner, and I instantly was hit with this overwhelming sense of nausea and fear and being watched, and everything was screaming at me to leave. I froze and must have made some noise because my brother turned around and asked what was wrong. I managed to say I wanted to leave now and climbed out as quickly as I could, followed immediately by my brother. We packed up and left, never have gone back and never will. Haven't told anyone what actually happened, just said I wasn't feeling well, and they forgot pretty quickly. The thing that really makes it creepy for me is I have never had the dream again. Year after year I would have it consistently, but it just stopped after that. But I still remember it all, and I still feel afraid, almost an external fear when I think of it. Edit. When I said I never talked about it, I meant never talked about the experience in the cave. I did mention my dream to a friend years before we ever went to Dog Drop. Edit 2. Saw some people talking about looking up the cave or visiting. Just want to say, never go caving, especially in an unfamiliar place, without a guide who belongs to a local group. if you belong to another group but have never been in the area, it's best to talk to a local one before leaving. Caving is dangerous and people die. Don't be arrogant and try and rappel on a garden hose. Yes, someone did that. Yes, they died. The local grotto you can check out is called the Tampa Bay Area Grotto, and yes, the initials are TBAG. Story number 8. There was a lady, my friend's half-sister's mom, if that makes any sense, who would cut my hair at my house. She had a boyfriend who I had met once, very briefly. About a year after meeting him, she came over to cut my hair, but this time, she unexpectedly brought her boyfriend along with her. I hadn't seen her in a while, and it seemed like something was different, and he was acting very odd. She went to the bathroom, and he began proposing that we hang out sometime, but she can't know. I'm serious. I said sure, just to get him off my back. I honestly thought they were on drugs, and I was just trying to keep everything peaceful and get them out of there ASAP. As they were finally leaving, he's behind her, and he goes to wave goodbye and throws a note on the ground that said, "Call me, it's our secret promise," with his phone number on it. I did not call. 2 days later, I kept getting missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. I never answered them. Then eventually, I got a text message saying, "Hey, it's Ray," his name. "Can you please call me? I really need your help with something." I didn't respond. He kept texting me, saying he needed a favor. Since I never gave him my phone number to begin with, and since this man knows where I live, I was pretty alarmed. I tried to go to the police station to see if there was anything I could do, but the station I went to was not open to the public. That was the only station I knew of. I could have looked up another one, but I kind of felt stupid for being there in the first place, you know? So I just went home. The next morning at 8 a.m., I wake up to very loud banging on my door. I couldn't see anyone out the window, and I don't have a peephole, so I opened the door a little bit. I thought it could have been my parents, since I live right by them. But no. It was Ray. He was pressed up against the door, which is why I couldn't see him out the window. He was smiling, and I quickly shut the door on him and called 911. He left before the cop showed up and sent a text message to the effect of, "I don't want to inconvenience you. Sorry to bug you." The cop told me to text him back saying, "Do not contact me in any way, shape, or form, or I will go to the police again," and made me take a picture of the cop car in front of my house and send that too. Then he left saying, "It's not illegal for someone to like you." Well, the next day, I got another missed call from Ray's number, so I went to a different police station. The usual front desk person was sick, and the man filling in for her was a cop. He seemed like he actually wanted to help me, and after a quick type-in of Ray's phone number to his computer, he had me come around to identify his mugshot. It turns out Ray is a level 3 sex offender, a child rapist to be exact. He wasn't even allowed in my state. The cop said that was just the beginning of it, but wasn't allowed to further discuss his charges, though he did mention that I was Ray's type. I was 23 at the time, but looked 15/16. Ray was 38, so I had to take screenshots of every missed call and every text message, take pictures of the note, put the note in a baggie and bring it to the police. I Googled his name and found some articles about him being a sex offender. I printed them out along with my screenshots and took them to the courthouse to file a stalking order. It should have just been a harassment order, but the lady there told me to put stalking so I wouldn't have to pay the $85 fee. Eventually, the cops found him a few days later, arrested him, and served him his papers. We had a court date which he did not show up to, and I was given a 10-year protection order. Last I heard, he was released from jail but went back for burglary. Story number 9. In the early 2000s, when I was 6 and lived in a small town called Walla Walla, I lived in an area where the vast majority of homes were built in the late 1800s. We only rented the house for a year, but weird things happened a lot in this house. Things such as seeing someone walk into the other room, but as soon as I turned the corner, no one would be there. Sometimes I heard someone call my name, but everyone would be out in the yard, completely fixated on something else. In my older brother's room, he said he could hear dog growling from his closet, even though no one near us had a dog. I'm a skeptic, so I usually explain those things away, except for one instance that, to this day, me and my older brother, who was 12 at the time, can't explain. My little brother had just been born 10 months prior, and my parents were completely okay with me and my older brother watching him while they made one quick trip to the store. Since it was such a small town, we lived only a couple buildings away from the nearest grocery store, and the store was as big as a Walgreens. We were also good friends with all the neighbors, so if there was a problem, we had people to run to. As far as my parents were concerned, we would be okay for 20 minutes. We were instructed for us to stay together and never separate and don't open the door unless we heard the secret knock. With this, we felt confident we would be all right. Me, my elder brother, and my fat little baby brother all sat on the couch in that order watching cartoons. I looked over at my little brother every now and then to make sure he was content. He had his pacifier and favorite bear in hand. I looked back at the TV, and within a few minutes looked back at my little brother. He was staring into my parents' bedroom. The lights were off, and all you can see is the silhouette of my parents' bed from the streetlights shining through the window. The window was the only things illuminated inside the room. Everything else was pitch black. The house is small, so my parents' room was adjacent to the living room where their door was only 30 feet away from us. His eyes were locked onto my parents' room, which sent a panic through me. I alerted my older brother, who shook my brother lightly to tell him to knock it off, but he just wouldn't look away. Then he finally moved his head as if he was watching something moving to the other side of my parents' bedroom. Back and forth slowly, he watched whatever was in that room, as if something was pacing inside the room. I continued to tell my little brother to stop it because it was freaking me out. He just couldn't stop watching whatever it was moving in my parents' room. Then he stopped moving his head back and forth. His head started to slowly move up towards the wall and then slowly towards the ceiling as if something started crawling up the wall. He kept slowly looking all the way up until he looked right above us. My parents did the secret knock, and my brother quickly unlocked the door, where I ran to them crying about what just happened. My parents, confused, turned on all the lights and found nothing. We creeped out our parents enough to where we all slept in the living room together for a full week. Story number 10. When I lived in Montana, I used to like to go backpacking on the weekends. I'd usually find an alpine lake to hike to far away from any trails and plot a course along a river or stream, spend the night there, then climb the closest peak in the morning. However, I was smart about it. I'd always tell my friends where I went and when to expect me home. Except the first time. The first time I went backpacking and did an overnight by myself in the mountains, I climbed up the trail that was quite literally right behind my house. It was spring at the time, so there was still snow on top of the mountains. Now, this area of Montana had no cell service. My neighbors had a cell repeater that ran the cell service over the internet or something, but once you were a few hundred yards away from the house, there was nothing. So I hiked about 11 miles up the steepest, most arduous trail you could think of. I wanted to make it to Tabletop Mountain because in my naivete I thought, yeah, I want to camp on top of that. I get to the ridgeline of the mountains, and at this point, I'm exhausted. I'm using subpar equipment and a really shitty old external frame backpack that put the weight nowhere near my hips. Not to mention that I had only started in the early afternoon and had essentially jogged up the first mile or two of the trail. The wind had also picked up something fierce to the point where I couldn't even see the top of the mountain from about 400 meters away because of the snow blowing around. Knowing that I couldn't hike down at that point, it was getting dark. I decided to set up camp. Unfortunately, I'm standing on the ridge of a mountain. I can't camp on top because it's way too windy, and obviously there's nowhere to camp on the side because it's a fucking mountain and it's really steep on both sides. So I found a little nook in the side of the mountain and dug in a flat spot into the snow and set up my tent there. Luckily, that seemed to work well enough. The tent was set up fine, and I got everything ready for bed. Being as cold as it was, I decided I wanted to start a fire. It was then that I learned that the fancy waterproof phosphorus matches I bought don't fucking burn at 10,000 feet. They just barely smolder. And I didn't have a camp stove at that point. With no way to start a fire, the sun going down and the wind picking up, I just decided to call it a night and try to get some sleep. Somehow, I fell asleep. I attribute it to the white noise effect of the wind on my tent. Now here comes the creepy part. I wake up in the middle of the night and it's dead. Silent. No sound at all. Now, I'm not talking the quiet you get in your bedroom at 3 a.m. I'm talking, I literally cannot hear anything other than my own heartbeat. I was holding my breath. No wind, no trees rustling, no tent flapping, no snow blowing against the side of my tent. Literally nothing. At that point, I was at least 7 miles as the crow flies from any human, any road, any speck of civilization. Now, you may not think that hearing nothing in nature is scary, but if you've ever been in nature, you know that the forest has a soundtrack. You hear the birds singing, the wind blowing, the river running, the trees swaying and creaking. So to hear nothing is odd, very creepy in itself, kind of like the something bad is about to happen creepy feeling that you get. Except I had no escape. Where could I go other than my tent? One wrong step outside and I fall down the mountainside. Not to mention that, well, I was completely alone. No one was coming to save me. No one knew where I was. As if nature was inside my head and listening, it finally gave me something to listen to. Footsteps. The unmistakable, undeniable sound of feet on snow. Somewhere, outside my tent, within earshot of me. Crunch. 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 A million things raced through my mind. The first being, why am I awake now? And my body must have woken me for a good reason. And did I just imagine that? And what the hell would be walking around up here? Again, as if someone was listening to my inner dialogue. Crunch. I froze. I didn't know what to do. They were so clear. Were they 10 feet away? 5 feet? What were they? Who were they? I didn't know what to do. I was paralyzed with fear. I listened to the footsteps for 30 seconds, take a few steps, then pause, then a few more. Finally, I couldn't take it. I had to do something. But I couldn't rightly get out of my tent without making noise. Zippers are loud as hell, especially in the silence, and any sound I made was seemingly magnified. So I did the only thing I could. I screamed as loud as I could. My heart was racing, the hair on my neck was raised, my knife in one hand and flashlight in the other, waiting for my unknown adversary's move. My ears were straining to hear anything over the sound of my quickened breath and my heart pounding in my head. But there was nothing. Nothing at all. I begged to hear something, to hear footsteps running away. I pleaded with nature to give me some sort of sign I was safe. But there was nothing. It was silent once more. It took me a good hour of reading to calm down after that. Thankfully, and this is weird to say on top of a mountain, the wind picked back up and I couldn't hear anything once again and fell into a very shallow sleep until the morning. When I woke up, I looked for footsteps, but the wind had blown any away. 20 minutes after the sun was up, I was packed and headed back down the mountain. I never camped again without telling someone where I was. Now I know lots of you will think I made this up. But you're wrong. Here's the picture I took of the sunrise. That's Tabletop Mountain in the background. Google it. It's in Montana, up the Asbestos Mine Trail. The footsteps you can see are mine from walking to the spot where I took the pic. Story number 11. This happened when I had just turned 20. I came home around 7 p.m. from work. It was winter, so it was already pretty dark out. Was extremely tired, so decided to nap. Threw on some comfy clothes, went to the bedroom, not my room, and turned off all of the lights. Closed the door after telling my brother to STFU because I am trying to sleep. The bedroom door was next to a closet with a window on the opposite side of the room. When you entered through the door, you would see the curtains and the window. The bed was in the middle. I got on the bed and shut my eyes. It's pitch black. My eyes hadn't adjusted to the darkness yet, so it didn't matter if they were open or closed. I was sleeping on my side facing the window. Closet behind me. The closet door would creak when opened, closed. I was about to fall asleep when I hear a creak. Eyes instantly open, but there's just darkness. Still can't see anything. My heart races for a second since the windows are closed because winter, and the door shouldn't be creaking. I tell myself I am a big boy. It's nothing. just the wind, and shut my eyes again. Start to feel this dread. It can only be described as pure fear, like I didn't feel safe. My heart started to race again, and I felt like someone or something was in the room. I honestly felt like I was being watched. And then I hear the fucking door creak again, but this time it was louder and longer. My eyes are wide open now, but for some reason I don't want to turn around. What was seconds felt like minutes to me. Yelled pretty loud for my family to come save me, and at the same time finally got the courage to get up and turn on the lights. Nothing. The closet door was closed. They laughed at me, but I swear I heard the door open, close twice. I don't live there anymore, and got myself a ferocious golden retriever to protect me from demons and ghosts. Story number 12. Not my story, but one involving my uncle, as told to me by my dad. When my uncle was 15, he dropped out of school, got a factory job, and moved into an apartment with a friend who did the same. After a few months, they decided to try to rent a house, as the apartment was not the best place to live. They managed to find a house for a cheap price, and while talking to the owner, they learned that it was so cheap because the tenants would usually suddenly move out after only a few months of living there. Now you should know at this point that my uncle is one of those people who is legitimately not scared of anything. He's a stereotypical Tennessee redneck, a very do-it-himself kind of guy. So they move in and get settled, and everything is well and good for a couple months. Then, some unnatural occurrences started happening, like the chandelier in the dining room would stay as if hit by a strong wind, but all the doors and windows were closed. Very typical horror movie tropes, so my uncle and his friend don't think much of it. With the permission of the owner, they decide to repaint the kitchen and pantry. They move everything out and set up the painting. They finish the kitchen and get the pantry ready for painting, but my uncle notices what looks like the outline of a door in the pantry wall where the shelves were, so naturally he takes down the plywood and unveils a small door. He opens that door and reveals a smaller room, about 5 by 5, with what looks like another door in the back wall. They uncover that door, and at this point, my uncle became unnerved. My uncle opens the door and reveals an even smaller room, about 3 by 3 by 4. The entire room is painted blood red, and there is a high chair, also painted red, bolted to the floor. My uncle is hit with a wave of absolute dread. He immediately closes and covers that door, then closes and covers the original door. He puts the shelf back into place, and he and his friend pack up all their stuff and move out by the end of the day. Story number 13. Starting at the age of 13, I had a stalker. He first found me in a Yahoo chat room. I know how stupid it was of me to be talking to strangers now. His name was Brian, or at least that's what he told me. I didn't tell him anything about myself, just made some small talk, and that was the end of it. Well, I started getting phone calls from a blocked number. At first, he would just breathe. Then after a few seconds, in this creepy deep voice, he would say, "Why ya doin'?" I'll never forget how he said it. It wasn't a question, almost as if he was taunting me. I hung up on him every time. He always called right back. He would call any hour of the day or night. My parents finally caught on that something wasn't right, and my dad started answering the phone and cussing him. I'm not sure to this day what he said to my dad, but he called the police. They suggested we change our phone number, so we did. They paid extra to have it unlisted. That night, I was on the phone with a friend when blocked caller started beeping in. My heart dropped. I switched over to that line, and without me saying a word, I heard, "Why ya doin'?" This happened with every cell phone that I ever got as well. A red truck started following me and my friends around town. Why I was out by myself at 13 with a known stalker, I'll never understand. Sure enough, the truck was the same as the picture on Brian's Yahoo picture. For the third time, I have to say IDK why I was so stupid, because I didn't tell my parents that he was following me until things got even worse. My parents were leaving to go see my grandma. I was on the phone with my cousin. I stepped out on the back porch, and he literally walked out from under the porch. I ran out the front of the house and thankfully caught my parents as they were getting into their car. My dad took off looking for him, but he was already gone. There is a festival in our hometown every year. I was walking around the festival with a friend when I noticed that Brian was following us. The place was completely crowded and plenty of cops were around, so my jackass self wasn't particularly concerned. I kind of laughed it off. What I wasn't considering at the time was that I had to walk home alone, which was about 4 blocks away from the crowded festival. My friend left, and as I headed home, I made yet another smart decision and took an alley. I was almost to the end when he popped out from behind a building and said my name. I ran as hard as I could until I got to my house and never looked back. My parents called the police, and again they said they couldn't do anything. The calls didn't stop until I was about 17. He messaged me and every friend I hung out with on MySpace, telling us what we were doing that day, what we were wearing. I switched schools and moved about 30 minutes away with a friend, and one day she received a Facebook message asking questions about me. She was horrified by it and told her parents. They contacted the police, and he was finally arrested, not even because he was stalking me, though. He had a warrant out for unrelated charges. Not even kidding. A few days later, I got a call from the jail. I didn't accept the call, but I know it was him. That was the last I ever heard from him. Story number 14. I used to work on the North Slope of Alaska in the oil industry. The work we were doing required us to travel far out into the Alaska Petroleum Reserve, which is basically just untamed tundra wilderness for hundreds of miles. The oil companies would build these long ice roads in the winter that would lead to exploration drilling pads. Our job was to go out after they finished the initial drilling and test rock formations for their oil-producing qualities. It was mid-January, the sun hadn't quite come up yet. And when I say the sun hadn't come up, I mean in almost a month and a half. Polar nights are intense. The particular well site we were traveling to was about 60 miles west of Alpine, Alaska, deep in the wilderness. Our job took a week, but we finished and were headed back to camp to finish our hitch and go home. At the beginning and end of the ice roads are guard shacks that you have to check in and out of for safety. No cell reception and radios work only up to a distance. If you don't check in or out in a set time, they come looking for you to ensure you're not a popsicle. It was about 4 in the morning, not that it mattered in the land of endless night, and we were halfway across the ice road. Travel was slow as the speed limit on the roads is only 25 miles, when something appeared on the road in our headlights. It was a man. In jeans, sneakers, and a hoodie jacket. Walking down an ice road in wilderness tundra at 4 a.m., and it was 20 degrees outside. It's not unusual for the local Inuit people to be out this far hunting. Maybe his snowmobile broke down and he's trying to get back to the guard shack? Seemed plausible. He didn't acknowledge us as our trucks rolled up next to him. He just kept shuffling forward. He didn't seem cold. His clothing, while totally not appropriate for this extreme weather, appeared warm and dry. We also noticed he wasn't Inuit, but Caucasian. I rolled down my window and asked if he needed any help and if he was okay. He still didn't acknowledge us, just kept shuffling forward. His face was completely blank, devoid of any thought or emotions. The other guys in my truck suggested that maybe he was in an accident and in shock. I continued rolling my truck alongside him as he trudged down the road, still trying to get his attention. Even in this extreme cold, I could occasionally get whiffs of a peculiar smell coming off him. He smelled acidic, if that makes sense. There was just a lot about this guy that made the hair on my neck stand up. The guy behind me in the truck's crew cab had had enough of all this. He rolled down his window and reached out to grab the guy. He later said he was just going to try and shake him out of his stupor. Before my buddy's hand could reach him, though, this walking popsicle spun around and latched on to my buddy's outstretched arm. He glared at my buddy and then at me, with this look of pure rage, not removing his hand from his arm. If emotions had a physical temperature, this guy could have melted the entire tundra that night. My buddy groaned in pain as he tried to get his arm free from Mr. Popsicle. At that moment, this guy starts screaming in our faces. There was so much hate and rage and anger in that scream. It was absolutely terrifying. I slammed on the gas and spun out on the ice for a second before the wheels caught and launched us forward. Popsicle Dude still had a hold of my buddy's arm and was trying to pull him out of the truck. He was running alongside the truck while the other guys in the cab held onto my buddy to keep him inside. After several moments, if could only have been a few seconds at most, My buddy tore free from this guy and we hauled ass to the guard shack another 30 miles down the road. We checked in with the guards and reported what we had just seen. The guard was looking at us like we were pulling a prank, but policy said they had to check it out regardless. My buddy's arm was sore, and when he pulled back his sleeve, there were noticeable bruises in the shape of a hand around his arm. We filed a report with the guard and were told to head back to our camp. None of us really wanted to talk about what happened, and it was a quiet drive the rest of the way. We flew home the next day. The next time we saw the guard at this shack, we asked him if they ever saw Mr. Popsicle on his patrols. He told us they searched up and down that ice road for a solid 12-hour shift and saw nothing, not even tracks in the snow leading off the road. He told us it was a good prank and that he'd get us back for making him waste a shift driving around. But it wasn't a prank. Who would make up a story like that, and who would willingly bruise their arm for a dumb prank? We never got a satisfying answer to what happened that evening. I still wonder about that dude, if he even was a dude. The Alaskan tundra is a weird place, and that was just one of my many weird stories from my time up there. I'll work to write down more of my experiences and share them to the appropriate subs. Story number 15. These events occurred 2 summers ago in the Grand Teton area. My boyfriend at the time, now husband, let's call him H, was an avid outdoorsman and also served in the military. I was an ecology major and wanted to spend more time outdoors, so he decided to take me on my first backpack, just the 2 of us. For those who aren't familiar, the Grand Tetons are well known for their wildlife, specifically grizzly bears. My only experience with bears up to this point was watching a little black bear cross the road from the safety of my car. Seeing grizzly country signs around every corner wasn't doing much to calm my nerves. First incident, my boyfriend looked like Indiana Jones. Machete hanging from his belt, large knives attached to each side of his pack, bear spray strapped to his waist. You get the picture. The beginning of our 25-mile journey was all uphill. When in bear country, you're supposed to make noise as to not startle the wildlife by accidentally sneaking up on it. As you can imagine, going up a steep hill while carrying a 40 lb pack makes it difficult to make conversation. We were an hour in and almost at the top of the ascent. I noticed that the woods had gone completely silent, save for the rushing stream that was to our left of the trail. Silent woods are never a good sign. This usually indicates predators nearby. At this point, I was in front of my boyfriend, and we were about to crest the hill. For the past 20 minutes, we had not said a word to each other, having been too tired to speak. We noticed the silence at the same time and gave each other knowing glances. I came up over the top of the hill and immediately froze. Sitting not 10 feet in front of me in the middle of the trail was a grizzly bear. My husband wasn't aware yet, as he was behind me, so I did the first thing I could think of. While still in my frozen stance, I managed to take my arm and started flinging it wildly behind me, trying to get H's attention. I was too terrified to speak. The bear went from sitting to all fours, not looking away from us once. H quickly swung me around so that I was behind him, and he just started yelling. Being in the military, he knows how to yell. The grizzly wasn't quite fazed, as it started to walk slowly towards us. At this point, I was on the verge of passing out from terror. This bear was about 5 feet in front of us when we heard a loud crack coming from the woods to our right. The bear heard it too, and he bolted towards the stream. A second crack boomed again, this time much closer than before. H said, "It's probably just some falling branches," but we both knew that wasn't the case. At this point, we were walking quickly up the trail in an attempt to create some distance from the grizzly and those strange noises. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up, and at that same moment, H stopped moving in front of me. He turned around to look at me, and I turned to look behind me. To this day, we are not sure what we saw. Back where we were standing was a large black-brown mass. It looked to be 3x bigger than the already large grizzly that we had seen just a few moments before. Its back was facing us, and then it stood on its back legs. It looked similar to a bear, but something about the shape was just off. At this point, it was probably stupid to run away, but that is exactly what we did. We were aware of heavy footsteps behind us, but neither of us looked back. The footsteps eventually faded. At this point, I was a mess. H was doing his best to console me. "Honey, this is extremely unusual. The bears usually stay away from humans. We're going to be okay. I'm sure that won't happen again." That was enough to convince me to continue on the backpack. Not another hour later, though, we reached a clearing where we decided to take a rest and eat a snack. About a minute after we had sat down, I noticed bushes moving in a line toward the clearing, toward us. Out of the brush comes this adolescent grizzly who looks just as spooked as I'm sure we did, but he came straight for us. H, being the crazy nut that he is, decided to charge back at the bear while screaming bear spray at the ready. That did the trick, and the bear ran off. All I could think was just my luck. But that wasn't even close to what happened the second night. Before we began our backpack, we had to let the ranger station know which trails as route we planned to take. With this information, they usually send a ranger on horseback at some point during the backpack to check on you to make sure everything is okay. There were not many approved trails left for us to choose from, and it was just our luck that they were the most difficult. Apparently, over the 3 days we were on those trails, we had been the sole hikers. We didn't see a single other person once we were en route. Anyhow, I guess we missed the ranger who came to check on us. We had been following hoofprints the entire second day, and we hadn't seen any the day before. I had some foot problems, so we spent valuable daylight trying to adjust my boot laces car socks to compensate for the pain. When we started on the trail again, we had maybe an hour or two of daylight left, and in the woods, it gets dark fast. I was exhausted. It was now dark out, and H was the only one with a working headlamp, as mine wouldn't even turn on for some reason. We needed to find somewhere to set up camp, as we still needed to eat. It was freezing, and the wind was blowing. It was creating a howling sound as it rushed through the trees, which made it difficult to hear H or discern any other sounds coming from the woods. After another hour of hiking through the dark, we found a clearing. Well, it was more like a bowl. It looked to be 200 millimeters in diameter, with the sides being 10 millers down from the trail to the bottom of the clearing. This place was strange. We both felt it, though he didn't tell me how freaked he was till after we had left. There was no moonlight, so all we had was the illumination from his headlamp, our small camp stove, and the flashlight that I fished from my pack. Half of the trees were dead fallen, just in the bowl. The vegetation everywhere else was very dense. To help alleviate my anxiousness, he started playing Ninja Sex Party out of his portable speaker. This didn't help much, as it just echoed off the trees, creating a dissonance of sounds. He also thought it would ward off any predators nearby. This is when we knew our anxiousness wasn't paranoia. The silence was back. There hadn't been a single bird chirp since we arrived at the clearing. It also may have had to do with the obnoxious music, but because of our previous experience, we decided to turn off the music and head into the tent. Also, it was freezing. As soon as we were situated in our sleeping bags, we heard deep cracks and thuds echoing from beyond the tree line. Falling trees? There had been a lot of wildfires and very little rain this season. Thud! We both froze. That sound wasn't an echo. It came from inside the clearing. Definitely not a falling tree. Thud! It came from right outside our tent. We both stopped breathing. H's hand found mine, and we clung to each other, paralyzed. Something dragged across the outside of our tent, making an indent as it went along. It was thin, almost, like a finger. "What is it?" I whispered, shaking. "I don't know. Shouldn't be a person. We're the only ones on this side of the mountain." I was trying my hardest to stifle sobs, trying to listen to what was outside. I could hear steps, but couldn't decipher what it was. The steps stopped, and then the whole side of the tent was slowly pushed in inwards. At this point, whatever was outside knew we were inside, so I shined my flashlight at the side of the tent. What I saw made my blood run cold, and it was the shape of a human face pressed into the tent wall. I could make out the nose and an open mouth. Each time they breathed, it made the tent around their mouth billow in and out. H said, "Fuck that," and pulled a Glock from his sleeping bag. He cocked it, and the sound shattered the silence. The face pulled back, and we heard fast footsteps heading towards the edge of the clearing. We didn't leave the tent till the sun was shining the next morning. The first thing we noticed was the smell of urine. We came out of the tent and looked around. Whoever it was had peed on our coals we had left in the fire, leaving a disgusting stench of evaporated pee. Footprints surrounded our tent, circling around multiple times. Muddy handprints decorated the outside of our tent. We think it was mud anyway.